Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Fiction and our new online virtual meeting rooms here. We're very happy that you're all joining us for this celebration of the Poets and Writers Complete Guide to Being a Writer launch party. I know people are still signing on, so I'm just gonna do a little talk about the Center for Fiction. We're the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction. So when Avid Press came to us about doing an event for this book, it seemed like an obvious yes. Poets and Writers and is also, of course, an amazing literary nonprofit. So we're happy to partner with them at this time tonight for this celebration. Joining us are the editors of the book, Mary Gannon, and she's the executive director of the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses. From 2013 to 2018, she was associate director and director for content for the Academy of American Poets, where she oversaw Poets.org, the Poem a Day series, American Poets Magazine, and education programming. From 2010 to 2013, she was editorial director of Poets and Writers and led the production of pw.org and the publication of Poets and Writers magazine, for which she served as editor from 2004 to 2009. She received her MFA in poetry from Arizona State University, where she was awarded the Swarthout Award in Writing and a BA in English from Skidmore College. She is a founding member of the Brooklyn Book Festival Literary Council. And joining her is Kevin Larimer. Kevin is the editor-in-chief of Poets and Writers, where he edits Poets and Writers magazine, oversees editorial content on the website, pw.org, and directs the organization's program of live events, Poets and Writers Live. He received his MFA from Iowa Writers Workshop, where he served as the poetry editor of the Iowa Review, and holds a BA in journalism from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. He is a member of the board of directors for the Elizabeth Kostova Foundation. He lectured and served on publishing panels at events such as the Library of Congress National Book Festival, the Sozopol Fiction Seminars, and many, many others. And I'm going to turn the event over to them to introduce the rest of the panelists, so please welcome them to the event.
Thank you so much, Melanie. We appreciate it. And hi, everyone. We're so happy to have you join us in this virtual space for the launch of our new book, The Poets and Writers Complete Guide to Being a Writer. We're looking forward to this evening of conversation and literary fellowship, especially in this unsettling and anxious time. We hope all of you are feeling safe and sound, and that perhaps you've had a chance to hunker down with a good book or two and maybe even get a little bit of writing done.
That's right. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you to the Center of Fiction for hosting this event. We are joined by four of our favorite people in the world, Nicole Dennis-Benn, Jamia Wilson, Annie Hwang, and Michael Taeckens, who have graciously agreed to help us celebrate the launch of our new book by talking with us about why writers are so important right now. We've asked them to be here tonight to help remind us that the world's writers are answering a higher calling. They have the power to change lives. They are engaged in a creative, generative act for the greater good. And they can do all of that from the safety of their own homes, which is a real perk right now. We want this book and this event to be validating, empowering, inspiring, and ultimately confirming those values we hold so dear.
Yeah, as we write on the very first page of the book, the stories we write, the poems, the novels, the essays, they define us. And in the midst of the current crisis, this theme resonates even more clearly.
Right, so we want to talk a little bit more about the book, but first we'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. Nicole Dennis-Benn is the author of the novel Patsy, which was selected as a New York Times Editor's Choice, a Financial Times Critics' Choice, and a Today Show Read with Jenna book club pick, as well as a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize. Her first novel is Here Comes the Sun, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, winner of the Lambda Literary Award for Fiction, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Award. the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award, and of course, the Center for Fiction's first novel prize. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Nicole. Jamia Wilson is a feminist activist, writer, and speaker. As director of the Feminist Press at the City University of New York and the former VP of programs at the Women's Media Center, Jamia has been a leading voice on women's rights issues for over a decade. She is the author of Young, Gifted, and Black, the introduction and oral history in Together We Rise, Behind the Scenes at the Protest Heard Around the World, Step Into Your Power, 23 Lessons on How to Live Your Best Life, ABCs of AOC, and the co-author of Roadmap for Revolutionaries, Resistance, Advocacy, and Activism for All. Hi, Jamia.
Hi, Jamia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. Before joining Aisha Pandey Literary, agent Annie Hwang began her career at Folio Literary Management, where she had the pleasure of working with debut and seasoned authors alike. Annie represents voice-driven literary fiction and select nonfiction. In particular, she gravitates towards subversive and irreverent literary fiction and impactful, mission-driven narrative nonfiction that grapples with the complexities of our world. A fierce champion of underrepresented voices, Annie is always on the hunt for gifted storytelling that stretches its genre to new heights. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Annie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. And Michael Taeckens is co-founder of Broadside PR. His clients include Sarah M. Broom, Nicole Dennis-Benn, Natasha Trethewey, Kevin Young, Leslie Jameson, Luis Alberto Uria, Elizabeth McCracken, and Ada Limon, among others. He formerly worked as marketing director at Grey Wolf Press and publicity director at Algonquin Books. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone. This book has been a long time in the making. Our editor, Jofi Ferrari Adler at Avid Reader Press, had the initial idea for the book back when Mary was editor of the magazine, and I continued talking with him over the years. We always thought it was a great idea. And as we approach the 50th anniversary of Poets and Writers, which the organization is celebrating this year, it seemed like the perfect time to distill 50 years of advice, inspiration, and support of creative writers, and to really marshal the collective knowledge of so many successful authors and publishing professionals.
Yeah, I mean, the book is titled The Complete Guide because it aims to give a comprehensive look at every step of the creative journey, from inspiration to publication and beyond. So we have chapters on craft, community, writing contests, MFA programs, literary agents, working with your editor, self-publishing, publicity and promotion, and more, as well as careful considerations of subjects like writers and time, money, family, happiness, careers, success, and failures.
Right. But it's not just us in the book. Throughout the book are brief essays called Writer's Notebooks by authors such as George Saunders, Ocean Vuong, Christina Baker-Klein, Charles Yu, Jane Hirschfield, Adam Hazlitt, Luis Alberto Uria, Jennifer Acker, and Ada Limon, who all write about the rewards and challenges they've experienced in their own writing lives.
We also have an amazing collection of recommended readings by authors such as Terrence Hayes, Cheryl Strayed, Yi Young Lee, Natalie Diaz, Danny Shapiro, Anthony Dewar, Benjamin Percy, Nicole Dennis-Benn, Naomi Shihab Nye, and Nafisa Thompson Spires.
Right. So there is a lot in this book, and we're so proud to have it published by Avid Reader Press. You can find more information at pw.org/complete guide. And of course, tonight's ticket entitles you to $10 off the Center for Fiction bookstore. And I am pretty sure they have copies of this book there. So yes. So I think without further ado, we have some questions for our guests.
Yeah. We wanted to start with you, Nicole. In your reading list for our book, you recommend Audre Lorde's 1982 biomythography, Zami, A New Spelling of My Name. And you write, "This book did more than liberate me as a college student, coming into my identity as Black, immigrant, and lesbian. It showed me how fundamental it is to write all my identities on the page. Can you talk a little bit more about this idea of writing your identities and why this is so important?
Yeah, so once again, good evening, everyone. So for me, writing my identities on the page, when I first saw Audre did that in Zami, it spoke to so many things that I was going through in my life at that time. You know, I was a first generation immigrant. I was coming to the U.S., to study, but at the same time feeling that this is not what I wanted. On the other hand, I was also coming out to myself as a lesbian. So when I read Zami, I was like, I'm not alone in this. I could actually exist. I could actually, even write as a way of getting a lot of things off my chest. And when I became a writer myself, I wanted to do the same thing for somebody else. Somebody who might be going through things, feeling that they're alone in the world. And even James Baldwin, there was a famous quote by him saying that, you think you're alone until you read a book. And that was exactly, what Zami did for me, and now what I'm trying to do in my books as I'm writing them. I always think about that young girl who wanted to see herself on the page, but did not see any parts of her identity anywhere. The immigrant perspective for sure, but more than that was the working class perspective, the being dark-skinned working class Jamaican, being lesbian, all those things that I never saw before. I wanted to put it out there, hoping that someone else would read that book or several books and say, oh, wow, this is my story is important. I'm not the only one going through what I'm going through. And so that's really why I suggested that in the Poets and Writers book, because for me, that was very important in my writing journey.
Yeah.
That's great. Have you heard from readers of your books, sort of passing that along? I mean, you got that from the Audre Lorde book, and have you heard from readers about that?
Yes, certainly. I've been hearing from a lot of readers. I mean, they hit me up on IG or on Twitter, saying how much my books mean to them. And it makes me feel really, really good that I'm actually impacting someone else's life. And so I'm like, okay, I've accomplished, what I had set out to do. And it also motivates me to keep doing that, because there's always, in the back of your, in our minds as writers, there's doubt all the time. But at the same time, when you know that you're doing something, and yes, it's a lonely road writing, but at the same time, you know that your words have the potential of inspiring other people. It really keeps me going, and it really makes me happy that I'm doing that, what Audre did for me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. So the next question is for Jamia. Jamia, in our chapter on independent publishing, you have a really inspiring quote about how you approach the work you do at the Feminist Press. You say, some of our earliest authors felt they had never before been given the permission to write. Many of our new authors find themselves outside of the agented, university-trained, and debt-filled system. And I'm wondering if you can sort of talk a little bit more about this idea of writers feeling like they haven't been given permission to write, and writers who may find themselves outside of the system.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to write that piece. I felt really honored as someone who has been reading poets and writers for so long, but also to have an opportunity to talk about Feminist Press in the conversation with other independent publishers about where we are and where we're going in our past. And we're also 50 years old this year. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And as we are thinking about our 50th year, we feel really lucky that our founder, Florence Howe, is 91 years old and still with us. And so I can actually talk with her regularly about these origins and the conditions under which she started this press, and how people discouraged her, told her that there was no need for gender studies, that it was this sort of wild pursuit that no one was going to support. And if it was something that happened, it wouldn't last for a very long time. And I think it comes from the heart of what you mentioned, this idea of having a society where so many of us are left behind because we are not what is centered, we are not what the dominant culture is focused on. And I think that the cultural zeitgeist that the feminist press emerged out of in 1970, 50 years ago, mirrors very much at its roots the conditions that we are facing right now, heightened by the global pandemic that we're all right that we're all in now, around the position of the artist in society. So when Nicole was talking about James Baldwin, I thought about how I knew very much what I think I wanted to do at Feminist Press when I saw Louise Merriweather, and her Daddy Was a Number Runner book that we had, and that we still have, and now have a prize named after, and saw the contract where James Baldwin signed to do her introduction for the Feminist Press. And I thought, oh, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to be here to do what James set us out to do, as I consider him an ancestor, right? What Louise Merriweather, who remains here, continuing to be a literary champion and an inspiration to me and many other Black writers and editors and more beyond us, that we need to be able to be here for the authors who are most marginalized, who have transformative insurgent narratives that can ignite movements and advance social transformation, and because of that, may be undermined, may be disappeared from the conversation, may not be valued at the level in which they deserve to be valued. And that is our legacy, and we're just carrying that forward. So that's why I really wanted to write it. I think that the foundation that Florence built is still extremely relevant today. She thought that Feminist Press would only need to be around for about 10 years. She said that she thought that corporate publishing would understand that we just need these writers, these voices are so important. We've unearthed the work of Zora Neale Hurston, for example, which the Feminist Press was a big part of in partnership with Alice Walker and other people who are now being celebrated. But it was really the Feminist Press that was a press of discovery around conversations that then become mainstream later on. And we're just really taking ownership of that role that we've had in the conversation. And so a lot of times, sometimes we will hear from other friends who are at other presses saying, you know, we wanted to do this idea, and when we were pitching it, someone said it was too radical, and we were able to say, look, Feminist Press did it, and they sold books. And we have one example is our children's book that featured the first sex worker parent. So I think that's what I was getting at in the conversation in the piece, was just that I think we are now just even deepening our commitment to this and thinking about who is being left out of the conversation, and who in the Feminist Press community, with the resources we have and the author care that we provide, that I'm really proud of, will be able to be a part of the movement that started 50 years ago, and we hope to go on for 50 more and beyond.
Absolutely.
That's great.
That's amazing. Michael, this question is for you. In the chapter about publicity and promotion, you talk about how writers can take a very healthy, integrated approach to the world of publicity. And you say, I always tell authors to get involved in their local literary community. In whatever city they're in or near, there's going to be stuff happening on a local level. When you befriend other people in the literary community, you help lift them up, and they will in turn lift you up. I wonder if you could talk a little bit just about that, and maybe offer an example or two of how writers can do that, get involved in their local communities, especially right now.
Sure, absolutely. So there's a lot of talk in literary communities about being a good literary citizen.
Yeah.
And essentially what that means is supporting and giving back to the literary community at large. And that can be done on both national and on regional levels. And I tell authors to always be thinking about things from a hyperlocal perspective within their own city, also within their own state, and then also within the whole kind of general geographic area that they're in. That's one whole level of publicity, and there's a very vibrant, thriving literary community locally, pretty much anywhere you are in the country. You could be in Alaska, you could be in Florida, New York City, of course, LA, Arizona. There are going to be writers networks, indie bookstores, some chain bookstores. There are going to be writers who are teaching at local universities, writers coming through town, reading at those bookstores or art centers. And I tell authors to think about how they can get involved locally. And that can include volunteering to interview authors who are coming through town at local bookstores or art centers, interviewing authors for local NPR or local weekly newspaper or daily newspaper. Oftentimes doing conversations with groups of authors who are within the same general area, setting up a special event, which again could be at a bookstore, it could be at a library. There are often literary festivals that happen either on a state level or a city level or a regional level. Just kind of thinking about all of the opportunities there are around you in your immediate area and how you can get involved in all of those across the board.
That's great.
Yeah. It reminds me too of some of the things you've said about, you know, in the book too, you talk about social media and the time to jump on social media is not when you have a book about to come out and, you know, start sort of flooding the channels with word about, you know, your book coming up. The time to do that is before you have a book. And I think probably the, you know, part of what you're saying in this quote about publicity is, you know, supporting others before you are in a position to then turn to them for support yourself. You know what I mean? So
right. And social media gives a really good opportunity to support other authors and network with other authors. And not only authors, but, you know, people who, booksellers and librarians, and even, you know, so many book critics for national media and regional media are on Twitter, for example, and very active on there. And you can interact with this entire community on social media. And it's really best to be thinking about getting on social media, you know, really more than a year ahead of your publication date. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of authors think, oh, my book is coming out in 4 months. Now's the time to sign up on Twitter. And I'm just going to keep posting about my book over and over and over again. And that's really kind of the wrong way to go about it. You want to think about it on a community level, and that you're part of this ecosystem, and you want to help this ecosystem survive and thrive, and in turn other people will do the same for you.
Right. Yeah, it also reminds me of something in the book about, we're talking about, you know, submitting to literary journals, and how it's a good idea, first of all, to be very informed about that literary journal before you submit your work to them. And one way to do that is subscribe to them. And by doing that, you're supporting like you're saying, supporting the ecosystem you want to be a part of. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And Nicole, we've seen you be out in the world so actively around your books and so generous with supporting other authors. Do you have anything to add to that?
I really agree with what Michael is saying in terms of supporting others. If you want the same kind of support. For me, I use social media more than anything else. I think that's really a great platform to support other authors. I mean, you may not know, you may not, you know, want to interview them one-on-one, or may not be ready to interview an author, but the least you can do is post about their books, for example. Little things like that. And I found that I've actually developed friendships or relationships with other authors via that medium, for sure. And also with my readers as well. I mean, not only people in the book industry, but readers also come to me through social media. And I feel like it's a great community to be a part of, not only when you're publishing the books, as Michael was just saying, but when you're out there just posting about your life or other books, or, you know, things that you're doing in your community with your community bookstore.
Yeah.
And so that's really useful.
Yeah, that's great. So Annie, I have a question for you. So you contributed to an advice column at pw.org called Agent Advice a little while ago. And there's something you wrote in response to a reader's question that I'd love to hear more about. You wrote, I'm not looking to represent this or that project. I'm looking to represent an author's entire literary career and everything that entails. So I'm curious, sort of, how does this approach really manifest itself in your day-to-day work? This idea that you're looking to represent an author's entire career, which seems like it's a relationship that goes beyond the kind of daily shifting realities of the marketplace. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the relationship between an author and their agent is like any other, you know, it really is, it takes collaboration, it takes trust, it takes partnership. And so I think in that sense, you know, I do take a very holistic approach to the way in which I agent, you know, and there is no one size fits all, because I think, you know, like every client has, you know, different needs that need to be addressed, you know, so it can look very, very different on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, it does go in some ways beyond the book and beyond the shifting realities of the marketplace, but it is also still tied to those things, because at the end of the day, you know, the book is the core of what you're trying to bring out into the world, and that does, you know, relate to what's going on in the marketplace. So I think my role in all this is really navigating and figuring out how to best negotiate all of that. And so that comes in the form of really frank conversations about what the marketplace could look like. That comes in the way of, you know, really frank conversations about, you know, how a client may be feeling psychologically about their work and the idea of putting it out into the world and the work that needs to be done to get it there. And then, you know, there are other things like, and I hate to use this word, but, you know, really when you start putting your work out there, what you're creating is a brand of sorts. You know, when I'm reading something from X, Y, and Z author, you know, you have a sense of what to expect from them or what you would want out of them. And so it's really, you know, an author brand is almost like any other brand. You know, it needs to be built and refined over time before it can really be established and withstand kind of the vagaries of the shifting marketplace. And so a lot of the work that I do with my clients does have to do with that. It's about, you know, not only creating opportunity, but seeing opportunity in maybe unexpected places, and, you know, helping guide a reader through, you know, the miasma that can be book publishing sometimes, and really maybe, you know, taking a look at what resources they have and figuring out how best to marshal them to, you know, help bring their book out into the world. And, you know, that does tie into, you know, this idea of being part of a community. You know, I think the one thing that I tell, you know, clients, and the thing that I talk about with other agents all the time, is how no one does this alone. Just it's impossible. You know, no one does it alone. It's absolutely an ecosystem in which, you know, we're all kind of interconnected and dependent upon one another in a variety of ways. And it's really figuring out what those connections are, where they can be made stronger, and really building from there.
That's great. And I imagine that those conversations start before you even decide to take on someone as a client, right? I mean, or you tell me, I mean, is that part of sort of getting to know someone and making sure or seeing whether or not it's a good fit for?
I mean, most of the time it does, you know, but obviously there are exceptions. I think, you know, if someone's coming in, you know, I do also represent some nonfiction. So some, you know, in that case, usually people coming in, I'm really taking a closer look at things like platform. You know, what is it they're saying? And are they able to reach the audience that needs or wants to hear that? And so in that sense, you know, maybe that conversation then kind of becomes null because they already kind of have a brand. You know, but on the other end of the spectrum, you know, with the literary fiction that I do, it's very, very much a conversation. And in those initial conversations, really what I'm looking for is this person up for having a creative collaboration? You know, is this person really looking for a partnership in which we both pull our weight? You know, and I know, you know, there are all different sorts of agents, so I'm only speaking for myself, but really, you know, I'm not just looking to represent someone whose dream it is to write a book or just, you know, has a book that they could sell. I'm really looking for someone who has a distinct point of view and something to say and a compelling way to say it. And then they also know, you know, beyond that, just understanding how to kind of disseminate what it is they want to say in a really powerful way. And I at that point, that's when I would kind of come in and help them distill all of that. So you don't have to have it all figured out, but I think being very clear on what your intentions are, that's usually what I'm looking for in those initial conversations, because it's a scary thing when, you know, you're thinking about entering into this, you know, who knows how long relationship with someone. And if they don't have a sense of what it is they want out of this relationship, or what their kind of career goals are, or their goals for the book, you know, it becomes almost like the blind leading the blind. So for me, I'm really looking for someone who's clear on, you know, what they want out of this and why that's important.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Jamia and Michael and Nicole, do you guys have anything to add to that? Just in terms of the working relationship with publishing professionals, either from the author's perspective or from the other side?
I can say at Feminist Press, I was just back here amending everything that Annie was saying, that we're very much listening for the entire experience because we publish so few books a year compared to many other larger publishers. We think about those books in the context of their season, but also in the context of the entire catalog of the Feminist Press conversation since 1970. And how are they in dialogue? Because a lot of debates in feminism, I think of the work we've done also as sort of a living archive. And, you know, those voices, like you said, voice-driven narratives, those voices over the generations who very much may disagree about how to do feminism, right? But they're rightful voices that need to be heard. And we've never been prescriptive about what those voices should be. We always talk about, is there a way to even quantify what a feminist press book looks like, feels like, smells like? And we have cookbooks of taste like. And we have our democratic editorial meetings, which I think is something that's very feminist and not always done, where everyone on the entire team talks about every book we acquire and every book that comes through us because of our belief in sort of being liberated gatekeepers. Every book is reviewed by us, and we actually talk about what it is that makes it so that there are some books that come to us where we all just know it's a feminist press book. And then there are books that we can see a real good market argument for and know that feminist press is not the rightful home, that it is not a feminist press book. And so there's a lot of conversation about how do we know that? And we've found some threads and through lines around understanding what that is, but it's an essence. And so I just love what you had to say, because we think about that a lot and have a lot of conversations with folks who will say, we know that book is going to find a home and it's going to do really well, but it's not necessarily the best fit for everything that you want for the book and what feminist press wants to do for the book. And in my mind, I think about it almost in the way that I think of my, like all my human and spiritual pursuits, which is this going to be a transactional experience or a transformational one? And usually there lies the answer.
Right. Wow, that's great. I'm going to steal that.
Please, please do. It really helps. I mean, it's literally my decisive point on all things like marriage, many things in my life. I've just asked myself that question.
That's great. Okay, so you all represent 4 separate but overlapping sectors of the writing and publishing community. So we're really interested in your experiences right now, because they will certainly reflect those of the writing and publishing community at large. During this global pandemic that we're all going through, as we've all worked from home for over a past month or so, how has your job changed and what new challenges have presented themselves to you? Michael, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, right now, pretty much every one of my clients is very anxious and, you know, worried about the kind of generalized chaos and anxiety that's going on in the media landscape and in the publishing industry. For one example, I have a client, Ayad Akhtar, who has a novel coming out in September with Little Brown. And Little Brown created these gorgeous advanced reading copies to mail out to the media. But unfortunately, Little Brown had to cut down their shipping due to the pandemic. And so, you know, we were not able to mail out these physical copies, which meant that I needed to go out to the 300 plus people in the media landscape that we were going to send ARCs to ask them, you know, I'd like to get a review copy to you. Do you prefer it via PDF or a NetGalley link? And usually people prefer one of those two. Sometimes people will say, is there any way you can send it as an Edelweiss link instead? So there's a lot of things are just really in flux right now, and people are trying to figure out how everything is going to work out. Additionally, many people in the media landscape are, you know, like everybody, working from home, and many of them are parents, and they're having to combine their work lives with their lives as parents at the exact same time. And it just means that they're not going to have as much time and attention to give to everything. And so a lot of publicists are being very patient, of course, and understanding that, and then also realizing it's going to mean going back to the media more often than usual to check in with them about, you know, how should I get this review copy to you? Do you have plans to review this book, or just to pitch, you know, a book to them? I wanted to rewind just a little bit back to the previous question about you know, collaboration and teamwork. And I loved what Annie said about how the entire ecosystem is interdependent. You know, we're all linked, we all help each other out. And it's, as a publicist, it's really important to me that the authors that I work with understand that I'm going to need, you know, work from them as well to help with the promotion of their book. I can use my relationship with Nicole as one example. Nicole has written many wonderful essays, and Nicole, her agent Julie Bear, and I would get on the phone and talk about, you know, different essay ideas. We would all have input on those. And then typically, you know, Nicole would take 3 or 4 of those ideas and write these really fantastic essays. And Julie and I would kind of weigh in on them, and Nicole would, you know, revise if necessary. And then I would submit those essays out to different media outlets. And, you know, the New York Times, Elle Magazine, places like that really embraced her essays. But I couldn't have done that without Nicole's work. And then also, likewise, you know, authors often go on these very, not all the time, sometimes they're small tours, sometimes they're larger tours, but even if it's just a few cities, they're very grueling. It takes a lot out of somebody to travel from city to city. Often they're having to wake up early to catch a plane or a train. And then, you know, to be kind of on at an event and do a Q&A, talk to local media, and then go back to your hotel, wake up early the next morning and go to the next city. And so it's really important that authors realize that there's a real team effort that is involved in the process.
Yeah.
Right.
Nicole?
I agree. You know, just to piggyback on what Michael said, and also even what Annie was alluding to in her discussion about an agent and the relationship between clients and agent. I think the most important relationship is the trust element. You know, you have to trust that person. And also when I know a lot of emerging writers are probably looking at this podcast right now or this interview right now, wondering, you know, what do we look for? And, you know, it's important when that person can actually embrace not only that one book that you may be, you know, querying, but your career. And so that's why when Annie was saying that, I was nodding my head, because I'm like, yes, you know, I really understand that. And that's what Julie Barr is for me, you know, that person who not only saw Here Comes the Sun, but she also saw many projects, you know, after that. And also what Michael says in terms of the publicity and everybody working together, the agents, publicists, editors working together. Again, you know, knowing that when you do have that product, and I'm going to refer to it as a product at this point, you're going to need the help of people to get it out there to the world for sure. But if you as an author has to pull your own weight, you know, I always, you know, cry to Julie or cry to Michael, like, or even Cordelia, oh, how I hate writing essays. And, you know, but even though I do, it's not my favorite thing. I don't get up in the morning skipping with my coffee saying I'm going to write. I know I have to do it especially when I have a book coming out and I have like themes that I want to expand on. Knowing that, no, I need to do this. And even before that, it was Michael who got me to open up my my social media accounts. You know, because before the events and the hotels and the Q&As and for a large audience, it's your social media. And now more than ever with Corona, us staying inside and not being able to have face-to-face conversations with our readers, is actually social media that's helping most of us now. And I would say to a lot of my writer friends, their writer friends right now, we're texting back and forth, and they're crying because they're like, I don't want to open up my social media, it's private. And I'm like, well, you got it. Right now is the time to do it. This is the time now to engage readers, to make sure that they know that you're still here. But also in terms of talking about your books or any projects that you have coming out, it's like you're also helping the publicity of your own book as well. And the publishers are doing their jobs, the agents are doing their jobs, but they have a million other projects that they're working on as well. So you have to pull your weight at some point as well. And so yeah, it's an ecosystem, as Michael says.
Right.
Yeah. We have some questions in the chat.
Yes. So there's one here for Annie. Sierra Chen asks, are writers able to stay with their agents if the agent moves agencies like you did?
We're getting straight to the drama and the
That's right. That's right.
I appreciate the forthright of that question. As an agent, I find myself saying this a lot, so I'm just gonna put this disclaimer out there. It depends. You know, every agent has a different relationship with their agency. Every agency is set up in a different way. I was very, very lucky to have started at a place that was really wonderful, and so when it came time to leave, you know, I was able to take the clients who wanted to continue working with me to the new agency. I think I mean, I kind of want to flip the question. You know, at the end of the day, I think a lot of, because I've gotten this question a lot because I moved agencies a couple months ago, so it's still relatively new. And I think what people don't realize is at the end of the day, the choice is the client's. You know, it's you guys have the power. You know, if someone didn't want to stay at an agency, if you don't want to stay with an agent, you know, as long as the contractual stuff is all, you know, buttoned up, you know, you get to determine where, you know, you want to go, where you want to be. So I think that's the better question to ask.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's something that we talk about in the book too, which is that, you know, it's important for writers to understand, I think, that they're the ones creating the work that everybody else wants, you know, you know, and also to sort of recognize the power of no a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, just because one editor wants to publish your work at whatever magazine or whatever press, that's really, that's great and gratifying, and that feels good, but it doesn't mean that you automatically have to do it. You know, you want to really sort of explore and investigate what you want out of it, and whether it's a good match.
No, one thing that I tell people all the time is, you know, I may be the agent, but you have the agency, you know, so you get to decide and you get to pick and choose. And just because, you know, opportunities come your way doesn't mean that you have to say yes to every one of them, you know?
Right.
We had another question that I think mirrors something that someone else asked. And it's kind of an open-ended question, but sort of for all the writers out there, you know, published or unpublished or beginning or emerging, what would you say to those who are working on projects that don't have a kind of built-in audience? You know, they don't have an agent, they may not have an editor, you know, the path ahead isn't clear. What's your advice to them, the people who are working on something that people aren't waiting for? Do any of you have?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. One thing is definitely submit your work, whether you're writing fiction or poetry or creative nonfiction. There are so many incredible literary journals out there, some in print, some that are digital exclusive, that are really hungry for new writers. And, you know, some of them are really, you know, small or niche publications, which is great for the writing community, because any kind of style that you're writing in, whether it's sci-fi and fantasy or romance or, you know, literary fiction, you know, flash fiction, there's going to be some kind of literary journal or literary publication out there that caters to that specific audience. So submit, submit, submit. And I always tell writers to, think about the entire range of literary publications that are out there. Of course, everybody's going to think of places like the New Yorker and the Paris Review. Yes, go with God, submit your work there, absolutely. But also think about these smaller literary journals that often take a lot more risks and a lot more chances with new writers. And I'd also like to just mention the example of one author, Andrea Lawler, who had been working on this novel, which has recently been published. It's called Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl. It's a book that they had been working on for, I think, like 10 years or so, and had been submitting parts of it to literary journals, and got some nice publications in some queer literary journals, and tried to find an agent and a publisher. Ended up with Rescue Press, which is a small press, a really great press. Rescue Press published the book. They did a really great job. It got some fantastic publicity, including a review in the New Yorker. And that led to Andrea getting a literary agent, and also Viking bought the paperback publication rights. So, that's not the typical story for every writer, but this is just one story, and it's a recent one, of a writer who has been working for many, many, many years and successfully published in smaller literary journals, published with a smaller, really great press, Rescue Press, and has really been met with a really nice level of success. So think about those smaller literary journals. They are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna piggyback off that too, because when I was trying to get my work out there, none of the mainstream journals wanted anything to do with what I was putting out there. They were, in fact, I didn't know anybody else that was writing the way I was writing dialect, for example, in dialogue. And I remember Quayle Literary Journal, which is a very, very small literary journal, was the one that picked up an excerpt of Here Comes the Sun. They were actually the first people to do that, and then followed by another very, very small literary journal, which is no longer with us, Red Rock Review. And it was actually Quayle that nominated me for a Pushcart Prize. And that what really, grew my confidence. And so that was how I was able to start querying. And then, of course, meeting Julie. And when Here Comes the Sun landed in her lap, not many publishers wanted Here Comes the Sun. I think I was like one publisher removed from, not even publishing the book, period. And then, of course, Katie Anderson Adams at the time, who was with Norton Liveright, took a chance on the book. And it's now, a really great, we met Michael, and now it's, everywhere. And so I feel like, had I been sitting there saying nobody would want to read a book like Here Comes the Sun, I don't think I would have pushed it out. So as I say to anyone right now, you're writing something, you have never seen it in the literary canon before, keep pushing, right? I'm here as a testament of being in this room because of like my gut saying, you know what, this story deserves to be told, and it deserves to be read as well. So let's keep pushing.
That's great.
Jamia, did you want to add something?
Yeah, the thing that came up for me when hearing everyone else's responses to this goes back to that message of not asking permission to be worthy of being a writer, not needing any other kinds of the external validations to know that if you're a writer, you're a writer. It's intrinsic to who you are. And I think that there's something that's really important in terms of owning that, and the way in which you are submitting to things, the ways in which you're also thinking in your own mind about, okay, who do I want to reach with this book, and what are the options for me, and having a variety of options, I think is really important. I think a lot of times I hear imposter syndrome from folks who do come from communities who are left out of the conversation via gatekeeping and cultural dynamics, media dynamics. And I think that it's really important for me in my life, especially, I've been thinking about this a lot, to actually go to those places where I haven't seen my voice specifically represented and to say it needs to be here, while also helping to cultivate within myself a strong sense of anchor of where I've come from by being a part of those literary communities that represent my community, represent my heritage. And so I think that's also really important. And so when I make decisions as an author about where I'm going to go, and I have books that I've worked with agents for, books that I've done myself, because I look at contracts all day. So it helps to kind of know that sometimes, depending on what it is, I'll do it myself. Or books that I've done with a smaller press or a bigger corporate publisher. And a lot of times for me, it's, what do I hope to accomplish with this project? Who do I hope to reach? And what does it have to do with the larger purpose I feel that I have in life? And I think that that's just something to think about, that you don't really need anyone's permission or anyone's external goalpost to tell you that you are a writer and that you're valuable. When I look at the catalog at Feminist Press, there are so many people who were told that they should not write, who have gone on to do amazing things. When I think of things I've read about what many of her contemporaries said about her, about Zora Neale Hurston, for example, authors who I love, who dissed Zora Neale Hurston because her use of dialect was not respectable enough for them, right? And so I think, especially for the people who you might be hearing feedback from the people that you're focus grouping yourself or in your community, that they might not get your work. Maybe it's not theirs to get. And maybe you need to keep moving to find those who get you and find the people who will hear you. We just had a review of Apsara Engine, which is this beautiful graphic novel by Bishak Som. And we didn't know that the pub date we'd chosen was actually Bengali New Year, which was what Bishak was named after. But it was an amazing Feminist Press moment. And this NPR review is really beautiful because it talked about how Bishak does the uncanny so well and how they had never really experienced a graphic novel like this before. And I thought, well, if we had normalized the voices of trans graphic novel lists of color throughout the world and global voices, and having futuristic visions for the world, then maybe, yes, you might have seen this before, right? But it was a beautiful review, but it made me really happy to think about how, yes, this was a voice that Feminist Press, all of us fell in love with, because we were saying, wow, this is something that's brought us to a new understanding and to new vision and possibility. So I just want the people who've always felt like maybe you're a misfit, that your voice is exactly the one to hear. I think all the best mentors in my life have been the ones who said, well, you know, the thing you really need to work on is just owning your strengths. And maybe those strengths are that everybody doesn't get you. And that helps you go where you need to go.
That's great. I love that. Thank you.
I love all those responses. That just makes me feel so whole. I just want, I mean, if nothing else, I just want to push even further beyond not asking for permission. And maybe this is just because my day-to-day job is to do this, is, you know, creating demand, you know, going back to this idea of, you know, I don't see anything else like that for me. I don't, you know, like, the reason I got into books, you know, was obviously because I loved books, but also I got to a point in my life where I realized and was struck by the fact that all these books I loved didn't love me back. And that's why I do what I do now. You know, I look for books where I feel seen. I look for books where I feel loved. And I feel like, you know, there's not a single person who, you know, has the same experience on this planet, and definitely not in publishing. And so if you feel like, you know, going back to this idea of, you know, feeling like a misfit, like there is, you know, an audience, it's just up to you and, you know, obviously your agent to literally like rip a hole in the fabric of the marketplace and say, here, this is where this belongs. And let me show you why. And to triangulate, you know, things that already exist and put your work in conversation. And, you know, this goes back to what, you know, Michael was saying about how this is an ecosystem and this is a community. And that's why it's important to participate enthusiastically. and, you know, and be really, really fearless about it. And, you know, to kind of sum up what some of you have said earlier, you know, choose progress over success, because the success does not come overnight. It never will. And so, you know, what can you do? What little steps can you, and it can be submitting to a literary journal. It can be finally hitting send on that query letter you've been meaning to send to an agent. It could be finally, you know, getting someone, you know, joining a writing group and really, you know, workshopping and honing your craft. Whatever it is, you know, choose that over, you know, I need, you know, this is what I think I need, you know, this is what success is. Definitely keep that as your North Star, but, you know, like, put one foot in front of the other, you know, sit down and do the work and participate.
Right. Absolutely.
So we have a number of questions. Thank you all for submitting your questions. Here's an interesting one, which you might have a thought on, Michael. It's from Susan Isaacs, great friend of Poets and Writers. Hi, Susan. So many writers aren't collegial. They want not only to write alone, but to be alone most of the time and enjoy their introversion. That's their nature. Is there a way to promote the book without the writer joining in?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of the authors I work with are actually more naturally introverted than they are extroverted. Interestingly, a lot of authors who use social media describe themselves as incredibly introverted. There's something about, you know, with Twitter, you know, expressing your thoughts in these 140 character limits, or whatever the limit is now, that allows them to express themselves, but they still, it doesn't have the same kind of feeling as, you know, going out to a party or talking to a room full of people or something. Certainly, you know, writing essays and getting your work out there is something that introverts can do and often do. I do talk to my clients who feel some anxiety as introverts about going on the road for touring. And, you know, I talk to them about ways that they can kind of reserve their energies, their physical energies, their emotional and mental energy, making sure they get good rest, etc. But I really think that a lot of what, you know, you can do as an author to promote doesn't require you to put yourself out there necessarily in person so much.
Okay. Let's see.
We have a couple quick questions just about literary magazines, and we just want to share the resources. Poets and Writers on their website has a literary magazine database, and the best thing to do is to research literary magazines, read them, and as our panelists were saying, get a sense of whether or not they're appropriate for your work so that you're not sending out blindly. You know, I'm the executive director of the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses, which is a nonprofit organization that supports literary magazines and non-presses. We also have a directory of publishers. But basically, I think that the best approach is to make sure that you are sending your work to an appropriate place where, you know, so you should read literary magazines, see if your work is a match, get a sense, and then just follow the guidelines. That's kind of the basic advice.
Yeah, that and there's just so many, which is such a great thing. I mean, there's just hundreds of them, and have fun exploring them, you know. I would say that's would be my advice too, is just to enjoy discovering new ones and reading the work, because you're going to learn things.
Right.
Here's one more. What kinds of tools do you use to keep track of your writing, publishing, editing projects? Old-fashioned notebook, Google Docs, smartphone reminders? Does anybody have any good little tools that they use to keep track of anything? Nicole, no. All right. Well, I'll say one thing. On the Poets and Writers website, pw.org, there is a submission tracker, and anybody can log into it's free. Log into the website, and you can use it for applications to MFA programs, literary magazines, literary agents, and you can log in who you submitted to, what you submitted. And then any notes, what the result was, that kind of thing, and also keep track of any entry fees. that you've been spending. So submission tracker on Poets and Writers will work too. Or a notebook. A notebook works
Good old-fashioned
too.
notebook, yeah, that always works
Yes.
as well. Index cards.
Yes. Okay, there's the first one that we received, so I want to answer this one. What are your thoughts on a low residency MFA program versus a traditional MFA program? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Just off the top?
I've worked with clients who've done low-res MFA programs. I think they're phenomenal. I think they're especially great for people who are, you know, working full-time jobs and they just don't have the opportunity to leave. There are a lot of MFA programs that are now fully funded, which is fantastic. It didn't used to be that way, but increasingly it is more so. But still, even, you know, there are many, many, many people who can't uproot their lives and move to a different city to apply to or to attend an MFA program. So those low-res MFA programs are really incredibly helpful and beneficial. And I think a lot of people think of Bennington and what's the one in Western North Carolina?
Warren Wilson.
Warren Wilson.
Yeah, Warren Wilson is the two main ones, but there are many more than those. And lots of incredibly talented writers who teach in them. And I'm 100% for them if people feel that they would like an MFA environment.
Right.
Yeah, another low residency program. I was just speaking with Kava Akbar yesterday, who's a brilliant poet, and he teaches at Warren Wilson, and also Randolph College has a low residency program. And you know, I would just to add to what you're saying, Michael, I would just say that, you know, it needs to work for you, you know, in terms of the money. You know, it's an excellent point, you know, making sure that there's full funding if that's a priority for you, which it is for a lot of people. And also that it just fits into what your life is, because, you know, writing is, and this is something that we go into in the book, is, you know, writing is a very important part of your life, but it's a part of your life. And there's other, you know, there's other responsibilities, there's jobs, there's families, that kind of thing. There's money. So it needs to work for you. But in terms of, like, I think the sort of, you know, low res versus full residency, I think just making sure it works for you and it's what you want. But in terms of, like, you know, anybody in publishing looking at one being inferior to the other, I would say absolutely doesn't happen. I don't know if you all have a thought on that, but
I'd absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think? It's 8:30. I think we're almost out of time here. So we just want to thank everybody. If we didn't get to your question, heck, email me, editor@pw.org, and I'll try to answer any of your questions. Thanks so much for asking them. And thanks to everyone, Center for Fiction. Thanks to all of our guests, Annie, Jamia, Michael, Nicole. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're so appreciative, and we wish you all the best of luck with your writing.
Yes, and have fun with the $10 off at the Center for Fiction bookstore.
Yes.
Thanks, Mary and Kevin. Thank you all. Thanks, panelists. And thanks, everybody who attended tonight. This will be up on our website, so if you missed anything, you can watch it over again and get every little ounce of expertise that was here tonight. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.